While Brother Mike was praying today, he mentioned the words that this gospel of the kingdom will be preached and then the end shall come. The preaching of the gospel before Jesus returns. When you and I think of preaching the gospel, we think of preaching the gospel to those outside of the church. We seldom think that we ourselves need to hear the gospel. And so this morning I'd like to share a brief summary of what the gospel is for the benefit of our few young people that we have here today. Jack and Jacques and Joseph. The preaching of the gospel for the sake of our young people. And by the way, you may have noticed in the bulletin that on the 15th of March, we'll have a Global Youth Day, and we're preparing a special program for that day. So what is the gospel for young people? Well, this might never happen, but I hope the illustration helps you to understand what the gospel is to a young person. This might not ever happen to you. So imagine you fail every single subject. At the end of the year comes and you get Fs. You failed for every single subject. And you realize that you're not going to make the year, you're not going to pass the year. But somehow one of your teachers, in his goodness and in his grace, wipes out all the F's from your record, all the failures. So you have a clean record, no F's, no failures. Will you pass the year? Yes, no? Will you pass the year if the teacher wipes out all the F's, all the failures from your record? Well, you do need a clean record, but the teacher, as I said to Jack and to Joseph, this will never happen to you here on earth. But the teacher, in his goodness, not only wipes all your failures, but what does he do? He adds all the A pluses. And then with that, you pass the year. So, this means to us that when we come before God, He cleans all our failures, but He adds all of His righteousness. And it's based upon the clean record plus the righteousness that He's added on our record that we may have the hope of life eternal. As, again, Mike said in his prayer that this does not mean that we should take advantage of the goodness of God and go and live a life as we wish. We live a life for His glory. And so in a nutshell, Jack and Joseph, this is what the gospel is for you. I hope you understand it. I hope it brings you joy. I hope you more clearly understand what is God's grace and mercy for us. This past week I had the privilege of attending a conference at Andrews University where we spoke about how can we expand God's church. And I believe the words that we have on our screen are words that are the proper words for us as a congregation. We are a place of hope. Every time we meet with God and meet with fellow believers, we find hope. We are a place of healing. We want to find physical healing and spiritual healing and emotional healing. And we're also a place of fellowship. And I believe you me, fellowship is so important in our lives. One of the greatest tragedies of our world is that we have never been as connected and yet as lonely as people are today. People today are experiencing loneliness to such an extent that many of them are suffering physically and emotionally because of loneliness. And so we are a place of fellowship, and we pray that that fellowship will not only be experienced here on the Sabbath morning, but also throughout the week. We would love for every visitor who comes to us to say, we enjoyed fellowship. It was nice meeting with other believers or people that are followers of Christ. Fellowship is such an uplifting experience. And I pray that your fellowship today will give you joy and will rejuvenate you. So, one of these days our church will have no snow. The good news today is that snow will come to an end. There's no need for us to feel down in the dumps because we can visualize April and May and then June, and it will be a glorious time of the year. So if you have any feedback for us, please do not hesitate to share it with us. The email is in the bulletin. I continue to study with this young man, Josh, every Sunday morning, sometimes at 10, sometimes at 9:30. And Josh keeps asking very deep questions. And we hope that one of these days, Josh will go through the waters of baptism. Teaching is an opportunity for us to learn. Every time I teach, I learn something. I learn something from the questions that the students ask, and I learn something from the experience of preparing to teach. So teaching is an opportunity to learn and to grow. And if you want to grow in your understanding of the Bible, the teachings that we hold here, find yourself a student, and may you find God's grace to help you teach what you believe to be the truth. Our studies don't last more than 30 minutes. We cover 3 to 5 texts, and always remember, I always begin with a question. What do you remember from the last question, the last lesson study we had, and what did you learn? And so sometimes he remembers, sometimes he doesn't, but we always learn something new. And one of the questions he had a little while ago is, how does one surrender to God? That is still the ultimate question that you and I need to explore. How do you and I fully surrender to God? So this is where I'd like to begin today. How many of you have been to the CN Tower in Toronto? How many of you have? Okay. What an experience, isn't it? I think it was Dana, I think you told me a while ago that, a few years ago actually, that one of your uncles, your Uncle Bill, helped in the building of the CN Tower. So, of course, CN Tower is based on science. Engineers study the laws of physics and chemistry and so forth. And so you cannot build a tower like that unless it's based on science. And what I learned about the CN Tower is that, believe it or not, the CN Tower was built with some flexibility. Did you know that? You will not feel it, but engineers built it in such a way that it kind of...
3 feet.
3 feet, really?
You stand up and talk.
Okay.
You can feel it.
Oh, really? Wow. And so there is that experience that, that is that aspect of the CN Tower. There is flexibility. You know, in life, flexibility is so important, isn't it? When you're married, when you have a relationship, you have to be flexible. You have to give and take. Flexibility is part of an essential ingredient of living on this world. And by the way, before I forget, I recognize and acknowledge all those individuals online. I meant to do that at the beginning of my message here. I believe we have some people from Florida, the Manos, Gabrielle and Mano, welcome. And we have our friends in Kenya. And who else do we have online? Diana and Maurice, welcome Diana and Maurice. And the one guys, and we have others as well. Gabrielle and Mano, as I've already mentioned. We have a number. I don't know who the number is, but wherever you are, welcome. It could be Micheline, might be someone else. So welcome to our service here today. And so, going back to the CN Tower. Now, when you get to the top of the CN Tower, most of us have taken a walk at the very top, have we not? And here is the top of the tower. The top of the tower. And it may not have happened to you, but when we walk on that glass, how do you feel about that? How many of you feel confident walking on that glass? How many of you do? You do? Wow, we have a brave man here. But every time I walk on the glass and I look down under, let me just see if I can, look down under, I do the same as Ruth did. I can't take that. I feel very uneasy. I feel unsafe almost. Because I'm looking. Where am I looking at? At the very bottom. And my greatest fear is what? Is falling down. I hope this will serve to illustrate a very important point of our message today. So, I'm there, I'm standing. I must confess that every time I take steps on that glass, I don't take normal strides. I take very small baby steps. Because as I look through the glass, I fear I'm going to fall. In fact, the only way I can walk around there is if I keep my eyes closed. If I keep my eyes closed, I don't see the very bottom. I'm not suggesting you do the same. You know, I can walk. I easily forget that there is a thick glass between myself, the sole of my shoes, and the bottom of the tower. And so, what is the significance of that for us today? There you have the guy, you know, unbelievable. It's a frightening sight, isn't it? Frightening sight. It is possible that we live at a time where everything we have been anchored on is being shaken. Dramatic changes are happening in our world, every sphere of life. We are experiencing uncertainty, and with uncertainty comes anxiety. And this anxiety is leading us to search for an anchor. And perhaps part of that search is this: what is next? We want to know what is next. We want to know what is next so that we can prepare for what is next. We want preaching which affirms our beliefs of what is about to happen. And especially if that preaching confirms what we have known. I'm not here to change your beliefs about what is about to happen. I'm here this morning to try to offer you hope. Hope in an anchor in God who helps us to walk by faith in the midst of our rapidly changing world. If you're top of that CN tower and you look down, you are naturally anxious. Right now, as we look ahead, we might be anxious, dealing with the uncertain. But there is hope. And I'd like to turn our Bibles to a prophet that can give us hope. Prophet Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. Now, what I'm about to say about Daniel, you might not ever heard before. And that might not mean that it is wrong, but I wanted to open your mind to what I'm about to tell you about Daniel. Now, how old was Daniel when Daniel was captured, taken from Jerusalem to Babylon? 18. I've heard similar ages, but a little younger than 18. He may have been as young as 16 years old. And so Sister White says he was 18. Okay, that's a trustworthy source, 18. So at the age of 18, he's taken from Jerusalem, from the comforts of his family. He was a member of a royal family, so he lacked nothing. He was taken from the comforts of the city of Jerusalem, from his routine, from his life, his religious life, and he's taken to an unknown land, unknown capital, the capital known as Babylon. So I want to ask you a question today. Did Daniel have any idea of what was about to happen to him? Was it given to him a vision, a revelation of how his life would unfold? Anyone would like to give an answer to that question? Did Daniel, at the age of 18, as he marched to Babylon, did he know of what was about to happen to him? Did he know that one day he would find himself as a counselor before the mightiest monarch on earth at the time? Did he know that? Did he know that his friends would one day land up in a fiery furnace? Did he know that? Did he know that he would one day land up in the lion's den? Did he know that? Did he know that one day he would find himself in this very uncomfortable position, as I said, sentenced to death because he refused to obey the king's command, and he kept on worshiping and turning to Jerusalem? Did Daniel have any idea of what was about to happen to him? Did he? I believe not. I believe not. So Daniel faced an uncertain future, and yet we found him to have been an overcomer, a conqueror. So what was the priority in Daniel's life, and what should be your priority right now as we live in these uncertain times? Yes, we have certain ideas of what is about to happen, but knowing by itself is no guarantee that we will be overcomers. In fact, in the New Testament we have evidence that Christ warned his disciples time and time again of what was going to happen, what was about to happen in his life. He was going to go to Jerusalem and be what? Be betrayed. And yet his disciples, number one, did not accept what he had to say, and number two, they were not ready for what happened. How many of us know the day of our trip to wherever we're going to be going? And the day arrives, or the hour arrives, and we what? We are not quite ready for that trip. How often does that happen to you and to me? Knowing what lies ahead is no guarantee that we'll be ready. It should be, but it is not a guarantee that we will be ready. So, what was very important in the life of Daniel, and I'm speaking here to young people because Daniel was your age, approximately your age, and how did Daniel prepare himself for what was about to happen? So, you are young. You might never have had a chance to study what lies ahead. You might not know the end-time map of what is about to happen. Can you be ready? Can you survive those times? Or you are older and you're forgetting. You're getting confused. Can you be an overcomer as a young person who does not know what is about to happen, or as an older person who is beginning to forget what is happening or what they have learned? What is the secret? What is the key to success, spiritual success, in the days and times that we find ourselves in? I believe Daniel has the answer. It says here that Daniel was taken to this capital city, Babylon, where he was supposed to be trained in the philosophy, religious beliefs of the nation of Babylon, so that he could one day become a servant of Babylon. What a frightening proposition. But what was Daniel's answer to all of that? In verse 8. But Daniel, what did he do? Purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief priests and of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now, the answer to our troublous times is not the health message, even though that is important. The answering to our perilous times is this: complete consecration to God, purposing in his heart to trust in God at all times. So, what is the secret? What was the secret in Daniel's life? Daniel did not allow the circumstances around him to influence his decision making, did not allow the philosophies of his days to change his mind. He purposed in his heart not to defile himself, not to defile himself with the food, not to defile himself with the philosophy, not to defile himself with the religion of the people around him. He purposed in his heart. And even though Daniel lived in Babylon, where there were so many philosophies, so many religious beliefs, he remained faithful. And as one crisis unfolded after another crisis, without his pre-knowledge, because of his faithfulness to God, he remained faithful and he was an overcomer. So, you're young. You don't know what is about to happen. You don't know what the next events, very next big events are. You're old. You're forgetting. What is the answer? Well, this is not the whole answer, but this is part of the answer. Part of the answer was that Daniel purposed in his heart. His relationship with God was of such a nature that the God who had brought him from Jerusalem to Babylon, as one crisis unfolded after another, that God helped him, sustained him, gave him the ability to overcome whatever set of circumstances came to him. The fact that you and I may know and do know what lies ahead is no guarantee that we'll be faithful. The guarantee will come from this particular determination that Daniel had. He purposed in his heart not to defile himself. And you know Daniel's lifestyle. How often did he pray to God? 3 times a day. He was in constant communion with God. Whether he was a prime minister or not, his time with God was his priority. And God sustained him. And God empowered him. And God gave him the grace that he needed to be faithful to him. Dear friends, what is the challenge that we face today? The challenge that we face today, I believe, the greatest challenge, the greatest focus, our greatest purpose should be not to be consumed by the things that are happening around us, but to maintain that communion with God in such a way that God will sustain us in these perilous times. I want us to turn to the scripture reading that Jim read this morning. John. Let's turn to John. John chapter 16. John chapter 16. Let's read that verse together and share a few thoughts about that. John chapter 16. In the Gospel of John chapter 16, Jesus is saying goodbye to his disciples. And he reveals to them what was going to happen to them. This is what he said in verse 31. Do you now believe? Indeed, the hour is coming. Yes, has now come, that you'll be scattered, each to his own, and will leave me alone. And yet, I'm not alone, because the Father is with me. The Father is with me. You know, a few years ago, we had this pandemic, and we felt quite isolated. It was a real test to us. We were deprived of fellowship, of worshiping together, as we are doing this morning. And what was our ultimate resource? Our ultimate resource was to turn to God, because with God we are never alone. Yet I'm not alone, because the Father is with me. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. And then Jesus makes this astounding statement. He says, in the world you will have what? Tribulation. As long as we live in this world, we will have tribulations. We'll have trials. Sometimes those trials will come from outside. Sometimes those trials will come from within. Sometimes those trials will come from our erroneous decisions, erroneous understandings, incomplete understandings. Those are things that give us trials and tribulations. In this world you will have tribulation. But be of good courage. I have what? Overcome the world. And what is Jesus saying here? Jesus is saying here, if just as he overcame the world, we too can what? Overcome the world. We can overcome the world even when we are alone, because God the Father is always with us. So, dear friends, today I challenge you to consider the experience of the prophet Daniel and to consider the experience of our Lord himself. Yet I'm not alone, because the Father is with me. These things I've spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. And just as Jesus overcame the world, just as Daniel was able to overcome the world, you and I will be able to overcome the world. What should be our greatest priority? Dear friends, I believe that whilst we need to understand what is happening around us, we must not be so consumed with what is happening around us that we do forget the most important priority in life. The most important priority in life is our connection with God. Why is that priority so important? Because Jesus said, I've gone to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, what will I do? I will come back. I'll come back to take you where? To be with him. Now, what should be our priority? Dear friends, here is our ultimate priority. Just as God is preparing a place for us, while we wait for the return of Christ, we should be preparing ourselves to be citizens of God's kingdom. That is our ultimate priority, and it's only by having a connection with God that we can prepare our characters, our lives, so that we can enter into God's kingdom. Without that preparation, without that character transformation, we will not enjoy what God is preparing for us. Yes, we're saved by grace, but without a character transformation, we'll not be able to enter into his kingdom. Just recently, I called some former church members of mine, and I said to them, what's the weather like? And they said, the weather is lovely. It's warm and sunny. I said to myself, is that possible? It's winter. How can it be warm and sunny? He says, no, Pastor, we moved back. We're back in Brazil. We're back in Brazil. Then they told me the story. We enjoyed living in Canada. We just couldn't adjust. And they mentioned the things they couldn't adjust to. So, this serves to illustrate the point that you and I may have a free passport to enter into God's kingdom. But unless we are prepared, our characters are transformed, we will not enjoy what God has prepared for us. And so I pray that your focus today will not be so much on what is happening around us. What's the next big event? We have some ideas. But our ultimate priority needs to be, must be, should be in our connection with God. So that whatever happens, He sustains us. And whatever happens when He comes, we'll be ready to enter into His kingdom. May God give us grace and strength as we live in these turbulent times. And may what is happening out there not unsettle our connection with Him. May we have peace in this turbulent world. And that peace is ours if we stay close to the one who gives us peace. Amen.